Welcome to the Cancer Interviews Podcast, where we are sharing the cancer journey together through interviews with ordinary people whose lives have somehow been impacted by cancer. And now today's host, former prostate cancer patient who underwent successful brachytherapy treatment, also known as SEEDS, and very grateful cancer survivor, Bruce Morton.
Greetings and welcome to the Cancer Interviews Podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Morton. Our guest on this segment is Sharon Henifin of Tualatin, Oregon. We hope you will find her story to be powerful, as she has been free from breast cancer since 1993. Her journey has inspired her to be part of a support group based in Oregon, and it has inspired her to be an author. So prepare yourself for a heartwarming story. And Sharon, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate you having me.
Sharon, we always start our interviews from the same place. It's our custom to have our guests personalize themselves by telling us a little bit about their life exclusive of cancer, what life was like before your diagnosis. So if you would, Sharon, tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you like to do for work, what you like to do when you're not working, that sort of thing.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, basically I was a woman who was working full time, raising 3 kids. I was busy. No time for cancer, that's for sure. And I loved taking photographs. I've always loved photography. I crochet, I knit, I do a lot of those domestic kind of things when I'm sitting around watching television. And I'm just a busy gal, and I always have been.
Now, you're from Tualatin now, which is near Portland. Are you a native of Oregon, or did you move to Oregon from somewhere else, like a lot of people?
Yeah, no, I actually lived in Oregon all my life, other than I was adopted. And so I was actually born in Aberdeen, Washington. But at 10 days old, I moved to Portland and have lived there 65 years of my life. So just recently did I actually kind of wander away from that area.
Now, it sounds like when you're describing all of this, it sounds like prior to your diagnosis, you were in good health. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had no health issues that I knew of. And all of a sudden, one day I got a weird little pain and I went, ow, and I kind of started poking around at my self, and there was a little lump there that I hadn't noticed before. And I poked at it for a couple of days and figured, I don't think it's supposed to be there. So I called my doctor and went in to see my, I had a plastic surgeon because I had augmentation from before when I was 24. And so I went in to see him, and I remember laying on the table. This was so telling, laying on the exam table, and he was examining me and looking into my eyes. And he's like, it's probably nothing, but let's get it out of there just to make sure. And I'm looking into his eyes and I'm like, oh, I'm in deep trouble. I could tell just from his eyes. Yeah, that was a telling day. So 7 days later, I had a lumpectomy. I did not have clean margins. For those who don't know what that means the cancer had already started walking around other places outside of the little tumor. And so 7 days later, I had a mastectomy with reconstruction. So it was very fast. Because it was very fast growing. And he told me later that it had literally grown from the first time he had felt it when he had taken it out 7 days later. I mean, so it was on the move. So I feel very fortunate.
Sharon, it was in jeopardy of perhaps metastasizing where?
Well, to the lymph nodes is the first place it goes. And then, of course, it can go all over your body. Breast cancer is one of those diseases that if it's caught in the breast at early stages, it is not deadly. it's when it moves past that can be very deadly. And I was very fortunate. It had not gone into my lymph nodes yet, even though it was heading that direction. But by having the complete mastectomy, and then I also did chemotherapy for insurance purposes, because I was only 40 when I was diagnosed. And so it was very fast growing, estrogen positive kind of cancer.
Now, what was the toughest part about the chemotherapy? Because chemotherapy is never fun.
No, it's not fun. And again, this was back in 1993 and 94 when I was actually doing the chemo. And so it was a little older regime than they have today, of course. And so my cocktail, if you will, is I had infusion every 2 weeks. So I'd go into the hospital and actually have the drip of chemo. But then I also had pills every single day. So there were, the first couple of days after chemo, of course, she didn't feel too well. But luckily, because of anti-nausea drugs, it wasn't real bad. It wasn't like I was physically sick. But at the same time, those pills kept me kind of at a blah kind of feeling the whole entire time. So, and I was doing that for 6 months. So it was a long haul.
Sharon, when I talk to other guests, whether it's breast cancer or lymphoma or something like that, people who undergo chemotherapy, as unpleasant as it is, once that course has run, they're glad that they underwent chemotherapy and they understood why they had to. Would you put yourself in the same category?
Oh, yeah. The thing is that's important to understand about chemotherapy is that it is for your whole entire body. So even though I felt comfortable with what my doctor had said as far as removing the cancer and it hadn't gone into my lymph nodes, it only takes one little cell to sneak around and get somewhere it's not supposed to be, and it can build a home there. And then that's when you have metastases in other areas, which is then what can be deadly. So yes, chemotherapy is definitely an important component of that process.
Once you began the process, were you optimistic that you would have a good outcome?
Yes, it's funny because I didn't have lymph node involvement, I pretty much put a line in the sand. And I'm like, okay, I'm over here. I didn't have lymph node involvement. I'm young and healthy and able to deal with this. And so I didn't really consider the death and dying piece of this puzzle. That was until a girlfriend of mine 3 years later was diagnosed. And she had 2 or 3 lymph nodes that were involved. And all of a sudden, that dying potential or the fear of all of that came flooding back like crazy. And I think I cried more for her diagnosis than I had for mine. And ultimately, of course, I was crying for me too, but it's the trigger that set me off for sure.
Now, when you were going through chemo, were there any things that you normally could do that you couldn't because of maybe fatigue or even hair loss or anything like that? In what way was your life altered physically, mentally, emotionally while you were on chemo?
Chemo was because it definitely affects your immune system. It really reduces your immune system. It breaks it down and then it builds back up in the 2 weeks between your infusions. And so you're just starting to, feel a little bit better, and then boom, it's time to, do it again. But the thing is that I found, I worked for a large corporation back then. And so I had a lot of short-term and long-term disability. And so I was able to stay off work, which was very, very helpful in one way, but not in another, because that was my social outlet. That was my friends were mostly work friends. And so I found myself home taking care of myself, but then your husband goes to work and your kids go to school and you're there with your thoughts, and that can be detrimental. So it was kind of a double-edged sword, being able to stay home during that time to take care of myself, but also, excuse me, I found it very isolating. Yeah, it was hard.
By the way, if you like what you hear on this segment, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the links below. Once there, you will see a bell icon, and if you click on that, we will notify you when we post a new interview. Now, Sharon, obviously, this is a very difficult time you were going through. You'd mentioned your husband, so I'm going to ask, what level of support was he?
Well, he's not my husband any longer, so that kind of gives you some clue. But what I found interesting about the way he viewed support is he actually did go to every one of my chemos. So you got a star for that. But what I found is he entertained the nurses. Yeah, he was kind of there for himself more so than me. But, everybody deals with these emotions differently. And unfortunately, I didn't feel very supported in that. But that is what it was.
Okay, how about your work friends? What I've learned from some of the interviews with guests is that some of our guests will share their cancer journey with their work friends. And some like to remain mum about it. So whether it's work friends or out of work friends, or friends outside of work, I should say, to what degree were they supportive?
Well, again, this was a long time ago, 1993, when I was diagnosed. I wasn't necessarily secretive about it. I mean, I told people that I was going through it. But being perfectly honest, out of sight, out of mind. And so when I wasn't at work all the time and I would get an occasional call checking in on me, I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I'm doing good, blah, 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 whatever. I'm not one to go down the pity trail. So I think I minimized what I was going through. And unfortunately, that really didn't help me because I never asked for help. And people, because again, breast cancer of late, there's a lot more conversation about how important it is for support and what people can do to help you when you're going through it. And I find women in general are really bad at asking for help. I was not unusual in that situation. And so even though people may have asked, I kind of poo-pooed it and I'm fine, sort of thing. And unfortunately, I think that was not the way to handle it. And hence, several years after I went through cancer and my friend Becky, I mentioned, was much better from cancer, we started Breast Friends. That's kind of how that all happened, because that was part of the problem. She was one of my friends who wanted to help, but she's thinking, well, gosh, she's got her husband at home and her kids at home, and I don't want to bother her. She's probably resting and, that kind of thing. And bottom line is, yes, that was true, but you need your friends and you need that support system, that emotional support system that not everybody understands.
Now, the support group Breast Friends is the one that we referenced at the very beginning of the segment, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But would you say, Sharon, if you knew then what you know now, you might have gone through your journey a little bit differently?
Yes, definitely. I would be a little more I guess, outspoken about what you really need during this time and how it's really important for friends and family to be more proactive and to be able to say, hey, I'm making a, double batch of meatloaf tonight. Can I bring you one over at about 6? Okay. And so make it very simple. I'm doing this anyway. I'll just drop it by. You don't even have to see me if you don't want to see me, kind of thing. I mean, but most of the time we do want to see people.
Now, Sharon, I'm guessing there had to be a juncture somewhere along the way in which you felt, hey, I'm getting the upper hand on this. And if there was a juncture like that, as I suspect there was, describe what that was like, just what you experienced and how it felt.
Well, it's funny because once you're actually done with treatment and all the surgeries, I ended up having 6 surgeries and 6 months of chemo. So it was an 11-month journey till I actually went back to work. And I remember going back to work, and chemo brain is real. If anyone has any question about that, chemo brain is real. And I remember going back to my job, and I'd been doing this job for a long time. So it's not like it was a brand new job that I just, kind of forgot the training. And I wondered if I could actually do that job again, because my brain just wasn't functioning the way it had in the past. And of course, I wasn't going to say anything to my boss. I wasn't going to say anything to coworkers. So you just kind of put your head down and, try to do the best you can. And honestly, I think when I made that turnaround was when my doctor, my plastic surgeon, called me one day and said, Sharon, you had such a wonderful result on your surgery. Would you mind talking to some of my other patients that so they can, understand that it's not as scary as they probably think it is at this point? And I'm like, sure, I'll be happy to do that. So I would meet with some of his patients, like at a coffee shop or a restaurant or something like that. And we would chat all around the subject. And pretty soon I would say, do you want to just see what it looks like? And we'd go into the bathroom and I'd do a little show and tell. And they would never have asked me, could they see what it looked like? But that's really what they were asking with all these questions. And so ultimately, being able to tell my story and how I found my lump and, going through chemo and how lonely it can be and, all of those things, I actually started to heal myself. And I think that was my turning point.
Our guest is Sharon Henifin of Tualatin, Oregon. She is free of breast cancer since 1993. Our story is moving in a good direction here, Sharon, as we're getting to the point in which some of this is getting into your rear view mirror. It sounds like that talk that you had with your doctor's patients was therapeutic for you, but beyond that, anything that you did or still do to this day to celebrate your cancer journey and getting past it?
That's a good question. I think what a cancer diagnosis and treatment and that whole time frame that you're thinking you potentially could die really allows you to think about what's really important in your life. And one of the things that I did later on was become a life coach, because the work that I was doing, that's kind of what I was doing anyway. And so I became a certified professional life coach and was able to help many, many, many other women because of that as well. And I think understanding your own values and what's important and what makes you happy and doing as much of those things as you possibly can, makes you a better person, makes you who you were designed to be. And I think that is a really important message for all of us.
That sounds like a message that probably finds its way into your coaching.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I want to talk about some of the things I mentioned at the very top, the support group Breast Friends. And after that, we want to get into your book. But first off, Breast Friends, if you would describe the genesis of the group and what is your involvement at this point?
Breast Friends was born basically at a hospital cafeteria. When Becky and I were having lunch, we were waiting for the results for a biopsy she had. She had another scare. And over that lunch, we had a conversation about, why we've retained our friendship all these years, what's missing in the whole breast cancer world, and what we could offer. And so in that, Breast Friends was born. And the whole point of Breast Friends was to teach the family and friends how best to support the woman who's going through breast cancer. That's bottom line. But what it morphed into is many programs that were designed specifically for the woman who was going through it, as well as the family and friends. And so it encompassed all of those things. I think the one thing that is the most important element when you're going through a cancer diagnosis yourself is to be able to talk to another woman who's been there, done that, and is on the other side. And when I would tell somebody I'm this many years out, or, depending on when it was, they're like, oh, please tell me more. They just wanted to hear how I got to that place. And so being able to share that with another woman, whether it was one-on-one, in a group setting, like a support group, a workshop, or even retreats, which is many of the things that Breast Friends offers.
And Breast Friends was born in what year? 2000.
So we are.
So, okay, well, you've completed 2 decades now. Well,
yes.
Let me ask you this, Sharon. I have no doubt that Breast Friends has grown in size in terms of its members or followers or whatever the proper classification is. But I'm guessing that Breast Friends has also grown in scope. You're doing things now that you weren't doing in the year 2000. What are some of those things?
Absolutely.
The ways in which Breast Friends has grown?
Well, personally, I think because I was kind of the program person for many years, becoming a certified life coach allowed me to create the materials necessary to do the workshops and the retreats that I loved so much. And again, taking, say, 8 women out of their normal environment to a beautiful, we rented a house many times at the coast, to a beautiful environment like that, and be able to talk about things that some of them had never even talked to their spouse about. Some of the problems that arise with your identity and your sexuality and your sensuality and all of the things that go along with a breast cancer diagnosis and treatment. It was magical, really, to be able to do that and to be able to share my story and be able to hear everyone else's story. And all of a sudden, these people who maybe were the type that didn't really talk about what they were going through too much with even family or friends, all of a sudden had a platform. They had a group of women who, oh my goodness, you didn't go through exactly what I went through, but I hear the exact same emotions that I felt when I was going through it. So it was immensely helpful for women to go through these workshops or retreats or even support groups, because I'm the type of person, I'm like, sorry, I'm known for making people cry because sometimes they haven't touched on some of those topics, and I'll get right in there in a really gentle way, and all of a sudden they can open up in a way that they haven't, and be able to feel those emotions that they haven't been able to feel.
By the way, Sharon, before we go any farther, the Becky that you referenced is Becky Olson, who has also been a guest on Cancer Interviews. And she has her own dynamic story as she survived breast cancer 5 times.
Yes.
But it is Sharon and Becky who are kind of the driving forces behind this support group in Tigard, I believe, Tigard, Oregon, Breast Friends. And before we get to your book, Sharon, if there's somebody watching right now who would like to connect with Best Friends, could you give us a web address or two, or any other information if they want to contact Breast Friends?
Absolutely. It's breastfriends.org is the website. And I can give a phone number if that's helpful too, 503-598-8048. And that's in the Portland metro area, like I said, Tigard. And there are people who can talk with you as far as find out what you're going through, and be able to follow you on your journey and kind of keep up with what's going on. And it's not just a one-shot thing. So understand, if you're not in the Portland metro area, they also are doing a lot of webinars now and doing a lot of wonderful other things that you don't even need to be in the local area, but they also have in-person support groups, as well as webinars and retreats and all of those things I already mentioned. Yeah.
So again, that's breastfriends.org. And could you give us that telephone number one more time?
Sure. 503-598-8048.
Okay, now I want to talk about you and your literary career. You wrote a book. So if you would talk to us about the genesis of that, what inspired you to write a book, and what was your literary journey like?
Well, I didn't really ever consider myself an author, number one. But at the same time, I did have a story to tell. Not only my own story, but more so the story of other women, as well as keeping it positive because of my life coaching principles and my just general belief that's how you can get through this life a lot easier. And so what I did was I started putting some ideas down, and at one of my retreats, this was funny. One of my retreats, I said out loud, because part of what we do at those retreats is come up with goals, and we want to share our goals with other people. And I said, I want to write a book about thriving beyond cancer, which is what the title of the retreat was, using some of those exercises and stories and things like that. And one of my participants said, I'll help you. And I went, again, I'm a woman who is terrible about asking for help. So for somebody to actually say to me they would help me without me even saying was a miracle in my estimation. So thank you. Wow. And then later we took some time and we were walking on the beach, and she was telling me how she had written a couple of technical type of books. So she's done this before. She was a brilliant woman. And I'm like, oh, but I'm just not a great writer. And she said, every book starts with a crappy first draft. And I made that G-rated, but And I'm like, I can do that. I could write a crappy first draft. And that's how she was able to like make it real for me that I could do this. And then we would go through little pieces, and she'd give me ideas of what I could do next. And she would help edit a few things. And I mean, it was amazing. And pretty soon I had a book.
And the name of the book is Thriving Beyond Cancer?
It is.
Okay. And if somebody wanted to get that book, would they get it through Amazon, or how would they get it? What do you recommend?
Yes. Amazon's the easiest. Yes. So Amazon.com, and then just type in Thriving Beyond Cancer. My name, Sharon Henifin. Any of those things would get it to you.
Wonderful. Sharon, now we want to bring this to a conclusion. And whereas we always start from the same place, we try to end from the same place. And I have a feeling this last question I'm going to ask you is going to go right into your wheelhouse.
Okay.
If you had a private audience with someone who had just been diagnosed, or if they're in that awful interim in which they haven't been diagnosed, but they think they might be diagnosed, and you had a chance to deliver a message to that person, what would that message be?
Well, I would say that breast cancer is not a fun thing to go through. It just isn't. But you will find that you will meet the most incredible, especially women, through this journey. And if you will allow yourself to open up and talk about your journey and share it with others, you will find it very cathartic, very healing, and it will make this journey so much easier for you. And when people ask you, what can I do for you? Have a list. Tell them what they can do for you. Or if they say, I'd like to do XYZ, say yes. That would be amazing. Thank you. And allow people to help you, because you're actually helping them by letting them help you. And I would say that looking back on my diagnosis and treatment and the way it changed my life, it has been a blessing in my life, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
Outstanding. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I have absolutely no doubt that this is going to resonate with a lot of people, and I hope it can also drive them to Breast Friends or reasonable facsimile thereof to get the very sort of support that you've talked about. So Sharon, once again, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And that's going to do it for this segment of Cancer Interviews. We hope you found the story of Sharon's cancer journey to be powerful and uplifting. So think about that when you have perhaps a chance to share it with a friend or loved one. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.